Whenever I prepare one of these reflections, the first thing I do is to read the morning's lessons and find out what the thread is that ties them together. Today's thread is that God's call sometimes leads through suffering, separation, near-death experience, and into a closer relationship with God. In Genesis, Hagar and Ishmael are rejected and cast out into the wilderness. They're abandoned, they're dying of thirst, they're ringing death's doorbell. God hears the bell ringing and he rescues them. Ishmael goes on to be the father of a great Islamic people. By the way, his name means God hears. Coincidentally, next week, Abraham is told to kill his other son, Isaac, only to be stopped by an angel at the last possible second. To recap, Abe casts his first son out into the wilderness to die. Then Abe very nearly whacks his second son. And I think this is wonderful Father's Day material. I can guarantee you that Abe never had a world's greatest dad mug. Our psalmist this morning is poor and needy, surrounded by trouble and pleading for mercy. He prays, "You, Lord, are good and forgiving," and later, "Save the child of your servant girl." As with Hagar and Ishmael, we see vulnerability, dependence, and rescue through God's steadfast love. In Romans, Paul tells us that Christian life is a participation in death and resurrection. We are buried with Christ, we are dead to sin, and we are raised into the newness of life. Paul is saying that new life comes through a kind of dying. Not necessarily a physical death, but the death of our old allegiances, the death of ego, and the death of the old self enslaved to sin. In Matthew's Gospel, Jesus warns us that following him divides families, destroys reputations, and even threatens life itself. Jesus says, "Those who find their life will lose it, and those who lose their life for my sake will find it." This isn't a cozy, soft, feet up by the fire, cocoa sort of religion. This is an in-your-face, not for the faint of heart, unapologetic religion. Jesus says his disciples will follow the same pattern seen with Hagar and Ishmael, the psalmist, and Paul. Hardship, apparent loss, and a deeper relationship with God. Today's readings reject any fantasies that faith is uncomfortable or safe. Faith meets us out in the wilderness. Faith involves painful separation, but new life emerges where something old has died. God's presence is always strongest wherever human control has failed. Many of you fondly remember Father Chuck. There's a picture of him there. One day, after Chuck had been our rector for about a year, he and I were preparing for a funeral. The deceased was a longtime parishioner who'd moved away before Chuck was here. I'd been here for decades and I only barely remembered her. In the sacristy, while Chuck and I were getting into our vestments, he very nonchalantly said, "A few years ago, I was doing a funeral in a small church on top of the hill. It was an icy day, and on the way up the church steps, the pallbearer slipped on the ice and dropped the casket. The casket slid down the hill and went right across the street. It crossed the street of the town, right through the front doors of a pharmacy, banged up into the counter, and the lid popped open. Chuck said that the corpse sat up and asked if he had anything that could stop this coughing. We chuckled. We got on with what we were doing. During the funeral at which we were serving, several people came up to share memories about the deceased. At one point, Chuck caught my eye, and he raised his fist to his mouth and went, "I thought I was going to die." I was losing the struggle to keep a straight face. Tears were running down my cheeks. This, of course, caused Chuck to almost lose it. I really have no idea how he made it through the rest of that service. After the service, we were back in the sacristy when the deceased woman's sister came in. And I thought, well, we're dead. But instead of berating us for laughing during the service, she told us how moved she and the rest of the family were, that we were so obviously overcome with emotion for her sister. Apparently you guys have no idea what's going on up here. For the record, for the next 6 years, I was never again able to look at Chuck during a funeral service. Which brings me to the box. Behind Chuck's picture over there is the box. What is the box? I'm a carpenter. I made a box. Father John, our beloved former rector and a world-renowned iconographer, decorated the box. It's quite literally a work of art. On Sunday morning, the box went home with a youngster who places an item in it. There were 2 rules. Number 1, the item must fit in the box. Number 2, the item cannot be dead, alive, or any combination thereof. On the next Sunday morning, the youngster would bring the box back and give it to Chuck. Chuck's task was to make up a short sermon on the spot that ties the item in the box to the morning's readings. Chuck had an amazing talent for this. He had an amazing talent for everything. Our darling little trolls deployed all their diabolical cunning and mastery of the dark arts in their attempts to foil Chuck. In my memory, I can't recall that he ever failed to come up with a theologically correct, intelligent, and entertaining thread. Unfortunately, Chuck is no longer with us, and you can't experience his humor, his warmth, or his brilliance. What was going to happen, well, our wardens, in their infinite wisdom, have asked me to fill in for Chuck and to create an off-the-cuff short sermon about what is in the box this morning. Unfortunately, due to reasons, the box didn't end up going home with anyone. There is an item in it, and I'm cheating because I know what it is. If my attempt at emulating Chuck's talents do not meet your expectations, or if I do not maintain my poise, if I dash any hope of having a future in the church, I ask your forgiveness, and I humbly beg you to place the blame for my performance squarely where it belongs, with the wardens. My original intention was to look in the box and do what Chuck used to do, come up with a short sermon. But like I said, it didn't go home. I do know what's in the box. It's a crucifix that used to belong to Andre Black, Willie's brother. Andre died years ago of sickle cell anemia. But it turns out that Andre was taking test drugs. Willie said that he was sort of a guinea pig, although he didn't like that term. The drugs that Andre was taking have turned out to be wonderful. Sickle cell is not cured, but with the therapy available today, people with sickle cell anemia live many, many, many more years than they used to. Which means that Andre went through a physical death, but he's now with God, who has given us strides of intelligence in working on sickle cell anemia. I can't think of anything else to say. I'm going to ask our warden to come up and speak.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Sheila Hewitt, and I am the warden. When Father Chuck was hired, I see 3 people who was on the vestry with me, Lisa Rose and Beth McLean, and I think Beth was the warden, the Virginia warden, when we hired Father Chuck. Father Chuck was really funny, really, really funny. And every Sunday morning, because I did coffee hour, he would come into the kitchen after 8 o'clock service, and he would say, well, what we're having for coffee hour? And then one day he came in and he said, you know, one of my favorite food is biscuits with white sausage gravy. And so the following Sunday, I had Alicia James, who was in college for hospitality. She made the white sausage gravy, and we bought biscuits and we served it, and he was like, oh, that was great. Father Howell was raising his daughter, Georgia, and she's a girl, and I've always worked with kids, and him and Liz would always, we'd be talking about the kids, and he'd be talking about Georgia, and I would give him little hints and different things to do. And then one day, after I had read for at service, he complimented me on my reading, and I told him I wanted to do a sermon. And he was like, okay. So we were talking about doing a sermon, but then he told me that when you do a sermon, you can't call people's names out. The sermon has to be general. You have to be talking to everybody in the church. You can't tell anybody that this sermon is especially for them. And when I became the warden in transition, Father Howell came to me in a dream to remind me through this transition period that I'm not to call out names of people who I think are doing things that are inappropriate. That if I speak, I must always speak generally. So that is my story with Father Howell, and I will call up Buster Black.
I have two fond memories of Father. One of them is, I wasn't there, but the day the family moved in, my daughter, Eva, was running around the entire oval the entire day to welcome them to the church. The two of them became best of friends. My other thing I remember most about Father Chuck is I was always able to tell him, respect your elders. I was about a week and a half older than him. And that's what I have. Now I'd like to call up Bill Sherman and Richard Daly.
Good morning, church. Good morning. Amen. Father Chuck, for me, my family, and from the two schools that Bill and I come from, the Holy Cross Episcopal Mission and St. John Episcopal Elementary and elementary, junior, and high school. So we are from those two institutions. And one of the memories that I have, and we have for Father, whenever it was coffee hour, he went from table to table. He touched each and every house. He was always concerned about people. I recall before he went in Colorado, he had gone to do a wedding for one of his friends. And before he left, he called me and he said, Richard? I said, yes, Father. I said, when I come back, I want you to work on a committee that I'm putting together. And I said, Father, anything you want me to do, we'll be here to do it. And so what Bill and I did on behalf of the two schools, we have a picture here with Father baptizing one of my grandchildren that we really cherish, and we have it in the house. And we also did a plaque in his memory. And I will read that, and Bill will say a few words. The plaque is dedicated to the loving memory of the Reverend Father Charles Howell, past rector of Christ Church, New Brighton, Staten Island, New York. Father Howell, you answer to God's call to serve and to spread his word. You serve well in obedience to God's will. During your ministry on earth, you touch lives through love, caring, building relationships, and networking with religious institutions, including schools without boundaries. You will always remain in our hearts for your special touch and your service to humanity. From BWW, BAFA, and EHS Episcopal Schools in Liberia. Is Brother Howell here today? Okay, so Mother, please come. We'd like to present this to you and your daughter.
Marahaba, we are grateful and delighted to be part of this Memorial Day, Father Day occasion to the late possible. As Richard said before I presented, Father Howell was not only here for one set of people. Father made sure the congregation was well touched and felt. For me, when I got here, I was doing a project before Richard joined me for the schools in Liberia. And our project was to find schools, materials to send to Liberia. And what really touched me when I got some books and other stuff, I was on my way to find a storage facility. And then he called me on the side and told me, why would you want to spend money? The money you're going to spend to ship. I have spoken with my wife, my daughter. Our active is free to you. Put those things in there until you get ready to ship. And I was very touched. Not only that again, although she's alive, my daughter, mother was teaching her go to them. I think they are just giving them a new set of books. Who didn't want them. And she called me straight, Joe, I have a surprise. I got there. She introduced me to the principal and the faculty. And the lady I was responsible for giving her the books came and we spoke. And those books were sent to Liberia. Last but not the least, their daughter. I don't know what motivated her. She told her father that I want to prepare a library kit for the students for pre-K to 6th grade, and she did that. So those are 4 memories. Not only he's gone now, but even the 2 that are living, they play a role in making sure that the children of Liberia will prepare them as the next generation for the world. So mother, all in all, we have the 2 schools. I'm going to present this for you to be able to follow.
I'd like to now ask Lisa Rose to come up.
Chuck grew up in the Midwest in the 70s, something that we had in common. At that time, and in that place, Sunday school was a big deal. Kids played on the lawns in matching VBS t-shirts, went putt-putt golfing and bowling together, and thrillingly got locked into a church a couple of Saturday nights each year for a sleep-deprived overnight that sealed friendships and seared into our hearts that church was where we belonged. When Father Chuck came to Christ Church, we had 3 services, 8, 9, and 10:30. And that separation between the groups, especially between the 9 a.m. children's service and the 10:30 choral service, was baked in. If you had young kids, you would come to the 9 a.m. and be schooled by Paul Smith in the right way to do church. The 10:30 service was formal and decidedly grown up. One of the first changes Father Chuck made was to combine them into one service at 10. It was hard, but he promised that the children would continue to sing and read and serve on the altar. I'm not sure what he told the 10:30 crowd to suggest that they tolerate the pew kicking and whining that ensued in that service, but he made it happen. He wanted us to worship together. He followed that change with adopting the Godly Play and Right 13 J2A Sunday School classes that we continue to use today. Scores of children experienced God's love and learned about their faith through these classes. Almost 20 youth have gone on pilgrimage, answering the baptismal call to proclaim by word and example the good news of God in Christ. Each year, young people from these programs open their hearts to God's grace and truth through confirmation. Charlie, who just came home from his freshman year in college, was 7 when Father Chuck died. The current Sunday school program is filled with children who either never knew him or whose memories of him are the soft, focused memories of youngest childhood. Catherine, Carol, Marcia, and Sandra are the people they will remember as beloved teachers and guides. All those years ago, when Father Chuck drew us together as a parish family and started vibrant, sustainable programs and nudged us toward roles as teachers, he was doing the job that God called him to do. That we continue to lift up and sustain the young people of this parish not only honors his memory, but it is the work we are meant to do. It isn't a job that ends. New people arrive. Beloved people leave. I often muse that he would have retired by now. That's what happens in churches, and Chuck was always really clear that it wasn't about him. It was and is about Christ and the work of living into relationship with God in the bodies and the sacred spaces we've been given.
Liz Guttulo.
Good morning, everyone. I've been asked to share a story about Father Chuck. As all of you may know, or most of you may know, is that with Father Chuck's blessing, Charlotte and I opened a Cub Scout camp. So every year we would have a picnic at the end of the year. Well, the first year we had it at one of the Cub Scouts' homes, and I invited Father Chuck to come, of course, and he did. The second year, in my mind, I forgot to tell him about it. We had it at Snug Harbor. How he found out, I still don't know. How he found out where we were and what time we were there, but knowing Father Chuck, he came. He was always made sure he knew what was going on in his family of Christ Church people. The other little story I'd like to tell, I've done altar guild for many, many years. And Father Chuck would always find himself down on Friday or Saturday morning when I would set up with other ladies and thank him. Every month, he would always thank me for my service. And I miss him every day. Thank you.
I'd like to thank everyone who had words to say about the man that we're honoring today. Is there anyone else out in the seats who has a special story that they would like to share? Raise your hand and please come up.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Willie Black IV, known as the church's Lee Black. I was told I was supposed to keep this short, so I ramble sometimes, so I'll try to keep this very short. I grew up in this church for at least 20 years, and Father Chuck was definitely one of the greatest human beings I've ever met in my life. Very engaging. Believe it or not, I'm very to myself, and whenever I came to services, he would stand by me and force me to talk pretty much. There are two stories I can think of. One I cannot tell to you guys here because we're in a place of worship. So if you're curious about that story, find me after the service, where I can talk about that sort of thing. It's a worth it story, I promise you. Second one I can tell you is that this man loved baseball. It was one of his favorite things to talk about. If I'm not mistaken, he was from Detroit. Was it Detroit or Chicago? Detroit, cool. I was beating myself up about not remembering that situation. Mrs. Howell, I apologize. But he loved, in the casual settings, like whether it be a spring fair or church outings, he always had to have his Detroit hat. And me and my grandpa would rip on him like, "You're here now. You have to root for the Yankees." And he was like, "Nope, loyal to my home team." And sure enough, that's what he did. He never lost his love for them. And to this day, he loved recording stats for baseball games. And I do that because of him now. Like, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't do that. Now I go to baseball games and get scorecards, and I'm like, "This is for you, Father Chuck, because this is what you used to do, and you're the one who got me into this sort of thing." So I definitely, it's tough to go to baseball games now, especially ones with the church, because like it's never going to be the same without him. It was his thing. You can see how into it he was, and just he was one of the greatest people to go to those games with. So that's those are memories I always have of him.
Hi. I know it might seem a little bit emotional, but I have to say this because I would regret it forever if I didn't. When I was a little girl, even though I was always bubbly to maybe you guys and like my teachers and stuff, I was still like the shyest kid on earth. Father Chuck was sometimes the only friend I had when I needed it. And it wasn't just like that for me, but he was like that towards all of the kids. And sometimes, even when I was just having a bad day, he wouldn't leave me alone until I left him with a smile on my face here. Which is why I kept coming back, and I kept doing things that I did for as long as I did. And I remember that Miss Sheila, like about a week ago, had mentioned that I did all these things for the kids here, or the people here, and I do so much for the church here, and while I'm forever grateful for that, I can't go without thanking him, because without him, I wouldn't have been as motivated as I was to do what I do here. And I know that there are people in here who feel the same way about him, because like Miss Lisa said, he didn't care just about himself. He did what he did, not just for this church, but because it was about Christ. I'm sorry. When Father Chuck passed away, it was the first time I ever saw my grandma full-on cry. And that was the first time that I registered and realized that, someone had passed away, and someone important to me and important to everybody at this church. So I just wanted to recognize that even though the kids in today in Godly Play, they might not know him now, the kids from before and the people now will remember him forever. And I just wanted to say that and make sure that he was recognized, and I thank him and I commend him for that. I miss him so much. And I also want to thank Ms. Howell too, because she was also there for me when nobody else was, and I really appreciate that. So thank you.
Anyone else?
Please turn to page.
I would just like to thank everybody for today, to be part of our Father Howell's celebration of his life, for his life when he was here at Christ Church, and he's well missed. But I kind of felt we should have done this so that we can have our final say goodbye to him and feel a little bit better. And I also like to wish everybody a happy Father's